I am Jije Colon. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Wildlife Conservation Network, and it's a pleasure to see so many of you today. I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank you for your trust and your generosity towards elephant. As you're going to hear today, your generosity has actually raised over $31 million in the past 10 years for the Elephant Crisis Fund, with significant impact and many opportunities to do more ahead of us. The Elephant Crisis Fund, or the ECF, is a joint initiative of our partners Save the Elephants and the Wildlife Conservation Network. It invests in multiple organizations, big and small, across Africa and the world, furthering Save the Elephants' mission to secure a future for elephants and WCN's mission to ensure wildlife and people coexist and thrive. So we set up the ECF in 2013 to harness the power of a network of excellent and varied organizations that exist across Africa and the world to combat the ivory poaching crisis. With its threat now reduced, which you'll hear about today, but not fully gone, the ECF's expanded to leverage the collective impact of all its grantees to improve coexistence between humans and elephants and protect elephant landscapes. The Elephant Crisis Fund is guided by some of the same values as WCN, such as impact, collaboration, and integrity, with a focus on financial transparency and efficiency. 100% of the funds raised for the ECF are deployed to field projects. WCN and STE assume the responsibility and the cost of managing the funds, administering the grants, and most importantly, identifying, vetting, and monitoring the quality and the impact of the projects. I've been on the allocation committee of the Elephant Crisis Fund since its inception, and today we have a privilege and the pleasure of being joined by our colleagues from Save the Elephants, who are really on the front lines of the Elephant Crisis Fund, doing the heavy lifting of working directly with grantees. Dr. Chris Thouless is Director of the Elephant Crisis Fund and Director of Research at Save the Elephants. He has spent more than 30 years working with elephants around Africa and Asia, particularly on movements and distribution, human-elephant conflict, and park management. He was chairman of the CITES panel of experts on African elephants in 1996, lead author of the 2016 African Elephant Status Report. Chris holds a master's in zoology from the University of Oxford and a PhD from the University of Cambridge, getting all his bases covered. He was also awarded the Queen's Gallantry Medal in 1991 for saving a colleague from an angry elephant. I'm sure he's gallant in many more ways than that. Dr. Lucy King is a zoologist, the head of a Human-Elephant Coexistence, or HEC program for Save the Elephants, and the program manager for the Elephant Crisis Fund for the HEC projects. Based in Kenya, Lucy has been researching the use of honeybees as a natural deterrent for crop-raiding elephants since 2006 in partnership with Oxford University, and has published her findings in many scientific journals. As a member of IUCN's Africa Elephant Specialist Group, Lucy promotes coexistence between elephants and people. Her TED Women talk on that subject was listed in the top 10 TED Talks for 2020. I highly encourage you to go check it out. Then last year, her team constructed a women's eco-enterprise center next to Tsavo National Park in southern Kenya, demonstrating alternative income projects for women living in conflict with elephants. And finally, and this first person you'll hear from, to give us an overview of investments made through the ECF, Jofi Clark is the manager of the Elephant Crisis Fund. She's worked in wildlife conservation in the UK and in Kenya for over 20 years in GIS and data management and project management, and has supported the ECF. I'm not sure what we would do without her during its growth and its evolution over the last 7 years. This is going to be a webinar style, so you can't ask questions directly. You could put the questions in the chat, and then I'll relay them over to the panelists, and they'll answer them after their presentations. Again, I want to thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your trust. Thanks for taking the time to be here with us. And without further ado, let's start with Jofi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Jije, for the introduction, and to everyone here for taking time to come and join us for this session. I'm going to briefly explain the granting process for the ECF and the investments that we've made since the start and during this year. As an emergency fund, we aim to get grants out to our partners in the field as quickly as possible and with minimal red tape. So the application process is as simple and quick as we can make it. We seek out projects most in need of support based on Save the Elephants' deep knowledge of elephants and African conservation organisations and our strong network of contacts. The ECF team also gets out and about as often as possible into the field to visit sites and to meet partners. As Jige already mentioned, the ECF board is made up of representatives from both WCN and Save the Elephants and meets every 6 weeks or so to assess proposals and approve grants. However, in an emergency situation, the board is able to give fast-track approval of grants and turn around funding in just a few days. We support organisations of all sizes, from large multi-country NGOs to small community-led projects working in one local area. For example, we had a grant meeting on Monday at which the board approved 6 grants to organisations ranging from the Wildlife Conservation Society and African Parks, which both work in multiple sites across Africa, to a fairly new youth-led grassroots project in South Sudan called the Agency for Conservation and Development, working to protect the last remaining elephants in Zaraf Game Reserve. Next slide, please. As Jige mentioned, we fund projects in 3 programmatic areas: ending the ivory crisis. This includes anti-poaching, anti-trafficking and demand reduction projects. Next slide, please. Promoting human-elephant coexistence, that's working with partners dealing with the threats to elephants in close proximity to people, and protecting elephant landscapes, which is giving elephants the space they need to survive and recover. As you can see from this map, we support projects in a wide geographic area. As we're supporting African elephants, our human-elephant coexistence projects and landscape protection projects are all based in Africa, but our partners working to address the ivory trade are active in both Africa, Asia, and in the US. Next slide, please. Since the ECF first began granting in 2013, we've awarded $31.6 million, thanks to the generosity of our amazing donors, through 410 grants to 105 partners working in 44 countries across the world. So far this year, we've awarded $2.4 million through 42 grants to 34 partners in 19 countries, and we have one last round of granting to add to these figures before the end of the year. As you can see from the slide, this funding has been split almost equally between our elephant landscapes and human-elephant coexistence pillars, with around 40% of funds going to each, and the remaining amount going towards addressing the ivory crisis. I'll now hand over to Chris Thouless, who's going to talk about ending the ivory crisis and protecting elephant landscapes. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Well, I want to start with some very sad news. A week ago, one of our close colleagues and partners, Mark Jenkins, and his son Peter, died in a plane accident in Tsavo National Park while trying to chase out illegal grazers. I first knew Mark over 30 years ago when he was head of Kenya Wildlife Services Special Operations. He's was highly experienced, very brave, one of the best park wardens around, got Meru National Park in Kenya going again. And he helped the Elephant Crisis Fund a great deal. We would often send him to places that had difficult management issues to try and get a real handle on what was going on. So he will be greatly missed. Next slide, please. Another one of our ECF grantees who was killed in the line of duty was Wayne Lotter. And this is slightly better, bittersweet news that again last week, 11 of the people responsible for his assassination to prevent him from investigating the ivory trade were convicted finally after 5 years of patient pursuit and dangerous investigations and pushing the real boundaries of what could be achieved in Tanzanian justice. So all 11 of these people, which included the 3 Burundians who were actually the hired killers who shot him, were convicted for death penalty. The death penalty is not carried out in Tanzania, but we hope that they will live out the rest of their natural lives in prison. So it's as I say, it's good news, but it's based on a very sad background. Next, please. Now, there have been this year a lot of successes in the fight against the illegal ivory trade. One of the biggest cases involved the Croman Network, which was a group that was responsible for a very large proportion of the ivory that was exported from Africa. It ranged from Senegal to Kenya. And after several years of investigations, 5 of the members of this group were indicted by the Southern District of New York. 3 of them were arrested and extradited fairly quickly. The other 2, who were Kenyans, were hiding out and they were not found. Earlier this year, the State Department put out a reward of $1 million each for their arrest. One of them was arrested immediately the next day, the other one after about 3 months. Now, so all 5 of the people indicted are now in jail or in prison in the United States. The initial 3 have all been sentenced now. And in fact, yesterday, Amara Sharif, one of these 3, was sentenced to 57 months. Some people have criticized this and said, you know, these are very short sentences compared to the relatively long sentences, the life sentences given in some African countries. I think the important thing, why these cases are important, and we have to really thank US Fish and Wildlife Service for pursuing them so diligently, is that these people came to justice. Many African countries, and I think we can especially think about Kenya, have very high sentences, but have been very unsuccessful in terms of actually getting high-level traffickers convicted. And this has sent a very important signal out. Next slide, please. So during the course of this year, there have been a lot of major arrests and convictions. For example, in Nigeria in May, 8 traffickers were arrested, including some Vietnamese. In July, a trafficker called Navara, who's wanted for murder in South Africa and suspected of 2 other murders, and a major trafficker of rhino and ivory horn was arrested. A Malaysian really important person, Teo Bunching, at the other end of the that major network, was extradited to the United States in October. 2 Congolese who were arrested in Washington State were convicted and sentenced in October, and a Zambian, Kelby Malambo, was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment in Malawi in November. So this is having a really big impact, and the trade in ivory is really at quite a reduced level. And we are hearing back that traffickers are very nervous. 5 years ago, trafficking in ivory was seen as a pretty risk-free activity. Now people are really scared and the costs of shipping ivory have gone up a lot because the chance of it being confiscated has increased. Now we're seeing this also feeding back into poaching figures, and poaching again is reduced across most of Africa. There are outbreaks of poaching in Central Africa. There's a kind of continued attrition, but it's not at a level where poaching is now the major threat to elephant populations almost anywhere. So that's really encouraging. Next slide, please. We must also continue to take note of the fact that Chinese law enforcement, and particularly the Anti-Smuggling Bureau, has played a really important role here. And part of the reason why ivory prices are low and people are not that interested in trafficking is because Chinese authorities are still clamping down on ivory in a way they're not clamping down on pangolin and rhino horn. And that's really important because it's keeping the prices down. There's probably a small market for ivory, but it's nothing like the level it was before the Chinese clamped down. And Chinese law enforcement is now much better at collaborating with external players. So the attempts to close down the ivory trade have really benefited from that. Next, please. I'm going to talk about 3 specific aspects to do with anti-poaching and particularly with saving elephant landscapes that we raised in our annual report. One of them is that one of the most successful ways of protecting elephants has been through the creation of public-private partnerships, where African countries that are very short on resources for conservation engage with NGOs who have the capacity to do protected area management. And the ECF, a major part of our funding goes towards helping these organizations who've been given the mandate to look after important protected areas in Africa by the host countries. The ECF can help in two major ways. One is that in many cases, these organizations get funding from large entities like the EU, US government, but there are often delays in that money coming through. And we can step in and fill the gap and make sure that salaries are paid while these bigger donors are able to provide support. So this is Upemba National Park in southern DRC, the home of the last surviving significant population of savanna elephants in Democratic Republic of Congo. Again, they had a shortfall in funding. We were able to fill that gap. Next slide, please. We also, that's Upemba's run by Forgotten Parks Foundation. We also did the same with Noé Foundation, a French organization that has taken on Konkwati National Park in southern Congo on the coast. Again, they had a shortfall in funding. We were able to fill that gap. Next slide, please. Another thing that causes problems for these organizations is that often they will be negotiating for governments for a long time. It's difficult for them to set aside enough money in their budgets because they don't know whether they're going to get the contract to manage the park straight away. Sorry, have we moved on to the next slide? I can't see it. And there are several parks that have come up in the course of this year. Thank you. That's, yeah. So Kafue National Park, the largest park in Zambia, a home of a significant elephant population with a chance for it to grow much more, connected potentially to the major Kaza population. After several years of negotiation, African Parks managed to get the mandate to manage it. And we were able to provide support to them in a timely fashion to help kickstart that process. Next slide, please. One of the most exciting opportunities that's come up is Boma and Bandingilo National Parks in South Sudan, that again, African Parks got the mandate to run earlier this year. And again, after a long process of negotiation. Boma, this landscape is enormous. It goes from the Nile all the way across to Ethiopia. Great grasslands, some hilly vegetation. It's particularly significant because it is the home of the second largest migration of ungulates, of antelope in Africa after the Serengeti. The picture on the right is a recent photograph of Tiang or Topi, which form part of this. And there's also it's believed to be about 1 million white-eared kob that migrate across this landscape. And the picture at the top is a photograph taken 2 weeks ago. The first sightings that the new management team has had of elephants. This is a herd of 100 elephants. We were worried that they might have been almost wiped out. We're really encouraged just in the last few weeks. It looks as if there's at least 200 left in this area, which is absolutely fantastic. And we've been able to help African Parks with the swift purchase of a new ultralight Savannah aircraft. Next, please. I've been working for the last year, part-time, helping to develop the new African elephant status report. The last one we did was in 2016. And during the course of this, and particularly working on the West African section, I've come to realize that things are really difficult for forest elephants, particularly in West Africa. And what's happened is that the numbers are so low that they've become, in many cases, what I've described as ghost elephants. We receive news of elephants being seen in widely distributed areas, but they're often only seen once. And there's no way that we can put them in the status report as a clear elephant population. It's just sightings of 1 elephant or 2 elephants or 3, maybe 5 in an area. And then they disappear again, and they're not seen for several years. And it seems that these elephants in these landscapes that are completely dominated by humans, with very small patches of forest, bits of agriculture of different kinds, have acquired this sort of ghost-like lifestyle where they're hiding out in patches of vegetation, they're raiding crops, and they're moving from one place to another, and they're not really able to gather together in a large enough population to be able, perhaps even to be able to breed effectively. Next slide, please. And there's some countries where this is all that is left. Now, Côte d'Ivoire, which I visited in 2019, there are a couple of reasonably large populations, but across the whole of the rest of the country, there are these elephants that are just popping up in different places and potentially causing trouble, not really being effectively protected. This is in a place called Montpecot, which I visited, and elephants were chased out of here during the Civil War by illegal cocoa farmers. The government came in and it reestablished control of this area and set it up as a forest reserve. And there were still a few elephants here. This is a picture from a camera trap. But as I say, they come and go, and nobody really knows where they are. Next slide, please. Now, in some countries, this is all that's left. So Côte d'Ivoire does have a significant population. Sorry, and this is actually in Côte d'Ivoire. This shows what happens. One of these elephants comes out into the open and is chased by curious people, and then they have to disappear and find shelter again. Next slide, please. So in some countries, like Senegal, we only know of a single elephant that occurs here. And in this photograph is from Guinea-Bissau, where we think there's probably no more than 10 or 20 elephants. What we really don't know is, do they have a chance of survival? Will they be able to live, or are they just going to be snuffed out one by one? And because they live for so long, this could happen. A country could have these ghost elephants for 20 or 30 years before the first one dies. In some cases, it seems like males can survive better than females. They seem to be able to live better by themselves. They're more resilient. It's really difficult to know what to do. You could capture them, but it's extremely difficult because they're so elusive. It has been tried in Côte d'Ivoire. And you need a safe place that the captured elephants can be put in. What we think is the most important thing is to have some real refuges and hope that the elephants will find those safe places and they will be able to gather together. It may be a long shot, but it's probably the only chance that we have. And we're supporting an organization working in Guinea-Bissau with these last elephants, where there is no proper protected area in the country. What we hope is that by finding out where these elephants occur, what the important areas are, where they exist away from humans, that there will be a chance to set up and to protect a proper national park. But in order to do that, the government of Guinea-Bissau needs to really know how many elephants they've got and to be given a solution that they can work on. And that is what our partners are doing at the moment. Next slide, please. Another issue that has really come to the fore recently is illegal gold mining. Just last week, I heard that this is a new threat to the elephants of the Gorma in Mali, where the jihadists who've taken over the range of the elephants are now doing getting the money from small-scale gold mining. And this is taking place around the places that these last surviving elephants are drinking. It's a real problem, and it varies in scale from the picture we see here, which is in Lower Zambezi in Zambia, with just a few people working with hand tools. Next slide, please. To this appalling mine in Okapi in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, which I visited in 2020, where there's a town now, 10,000 people living in it, Chinese companies with large-scale equipment, damaging huge areas. Next slide, please. And gold mining has all sorts of negative impacts. So this is in Minkebi in Gabon, which had the largest population of elephants in the country, 25,000. It's reckoned about 12,000, about half of them were killed by poachers operating out of this gold mine that was inside the southern boundary of the park. Luckily, the Gabonese government closed it down, but the damage had been done. So you get these sort of knock-on effects. You also get direct environmental effects. One of the most concerning is to do with the use of mercury. Next slide, please. again, this is a tough thing, not easy to handle, even inside protected areas, because gold mining can make so much money that they can subvert the management of protected areas. And in the case of Okapi, the gold mining is going towards supporting the local militias, and so they have a real interest in keeping these illegal activities going. This is Garamba, which I visited earlier this year in northeast Democratic Republic of Congo. This is a small-scale gold mine inside one of the hunting reserves on the edge of Garamba. And they're taking a sort of positive approach to this and saying to the gold miners, we know, you are going to continue gold mining. We will find a new site for you outside the protected area. And they're helping to support them with the sale of their gold, so it doesn't go to illegal terrorist groups and things like that, and also encouraging them to do the gold mining in a environmentally not friendly way, but a less environmentally damaging way that doesn't involve the use of mercury. We're also looking, I think it's important to be able to raise attention to these problems in Okapi, that big mine I showed you earlier. There are civil society groups that are campaigning to try and get those miners out of the reserve. We also believe that there's a possibility of trying to work on the supply of mercury. It is illegal. It's under the Minamata Convention, and that's not being properly regulated. And so if the supply of mercury can be controlled, then some of this mining may be reduced. We're still at the stage of trying to understand what's going on. In some places like Garamba, they are actually taking positive steps to try and reduce the level of illegal gold mining. But it's a big and increasing problem, and it's something that we're going to have to focus on more in the next year. So that's what I have to say. I'm going to hand over to Lucy now to talk about the third pillar of the Elephant Crisis Fund of human-elephant coexistence.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's really fantastic that so many of you have turned out. I'm greeting you from my research camp here in southern Kenya in Tsavo. I've got a load of bugs flying around my head, so sorry if they land on the screen. We've just started the rainy season here, and it's absolutely the beginning of the crop grading season. So it's quite epic at the moment out in the field. So we really appreciate you turning in and hearing all of the stories that we've got from the Elephant Crisis Fund. I've been privileged to join this team for the last 2 years, and it has been an unbelievable privilege to join Chris and to join the team that has been doing such great impact across Africa. The rise of human-elephant conflict has been really quite serious for us to deal with. And one of the things we focused on this year, which is in our annual report, is the development of this new manual. It's called the Human-Elephant Coexistence Toolbox. And this was a way for us at Save the Elephants to compile all the knowledge that we had from our partners across the range, including many from the Elephant Crisis Fund, who could help us with multitude of methods of how to live with elephants. So we've spent 2.5 years developing this manual with my team here in Kenya. And now we're starting to roll it out across the range, including sending it to all of our ECF partners, helping them with a real textbook of methods of how to live with elephants. And as you can see from Chris's talk, this is not easy. Some of the places these last elephants, some of these ghost elephants are living in are really deep forests. So this has been hugely challenging for most of our partners. And we're hoping that this toolbox that we've invented is going to be really helpful. So this is the front cover. Next slide, please. The toolbox is filled with 162 pages of methods that we have compiled of how to live with elephants. And it's beautifully illustrated with an illustrator based here in Kenya. This is an example of one of the sheets. Chili deterrence is a well-known method. Elephants don't like chilies. If it goes up their trunk, they get a really burning sensation. And there are 4 methods and 9 different processes within those 4 methods. And so we've got 9 pages of how to use chilies. And the way that it's illustrated means that even if you're not incredibly literate, you can follow the step-by-step processes. And we've just finished the translations of this toolbox into French and Swahili, which covers a lot of the elephant range. And when we get into next year, we really hope that we can get some resources together to translate this into more of the African languages. Shona is going to be one of the first ones we want to translate it to in Zimbabwe. So here, this is how the sheets work. Next slide, please. You'll see that there's like a step-by-step guide of a process. So here you can learn how to make a chili fence with all the different 1, 2, 3 steps, mixing the chilies, mixing the rags, the dirty oil that you dunk it in, and then you hang it up around your farm. And as you do that, the elephants find it really, really accurate. Next slide, please. We've been enjoying distributing this idea to some of our new partners in places, some of the more challenging places, like this location right in the heart of Ozala-Okuya National Park. It's in the Republic of Congo, and these parks have had very little support for human-elephant conflict issues. So they have taken the ideas from these methods and adapted it to their local needs. So here you have a strip of bed sheet that the guys have ripped up. They've dunked it in oil and they've soaked chilies into that oil. And now they're tying it up around a really precious part of their farm where they're storing the food. You can just make out the guy on the right has a COVID mask on to try and keep the chili out of his lungs, because it's pretty strong stuff. And this lasts for around, it can be anything from 2 to 4 weeks. So if you have a harvest coming up and you know you want to harvest your crop in the next 3 or 4 weeks, you can put this up and it can save the last of your crops. As the elephants approach and they touch these rags, the chili on the trunk will actually really sting their trunk. It's not lethal, it is a negative conditioning, and they will back away and they won't push through. As you can imagine, an elephant could push through in 2 seconds through that rag, but he won't push through because of the olfactory deterrent that chili produces. And these ideas that we've been using in the savannah being adapted for forest elephants is really exciting for us as scientists to be able to see how our partners are able to take these ideas and take them into the forest. Next slide, please. And some of our partners are now in some of the more unusual parts of West and Central Africa. This is a park called Monte Allen National Park in Equatorial Guinea. This is a new country for the Elephant Crisis Fund. And we've partnered with Bristol Zoological Society in this really unknown location in Central Africa. And there are very few elephants there and very little research that's gone into it. In fact, such little research that no one knows how elephants are going to respond to anything. So they've put up a number of camera traps. They're working out where the elephants are coming out of the forest, causing problems with the community. And they're trialing a load of innovative ideas, including smelly elephant repellent. They're wanting to look at beehives. They're trying flashing lights and a lot of innovative sort of behavioral analysis to see how these elephants can be kept out, because every single one of these forest elephants is so precious. Next slide, please. Some of these forest elephant reserves are incredibly small populations, and other countries have large elephant populations, like here in Gabon. The estimate is approximately 90,000 elephants, and this is brand new news that some of our partners have come out with the latest update that Chris was talking about in the Forest Elephant Status Report. And you know, the exact figure is not quite there yet. It's very hard to have a perfect figure for forest elephants, but there are a lot of very precious forest elephants living here, and therefore everyone counts. And we need to understand how we can help protect these elephants while the human population is going through a growth spurt. So in Gabon, there's still plenty of forest left, which is good news. It really is a stronghold for us to focus some support to. And we've partnered here with Space for Giants to innovate a new type of electric fencing that the farmers themselves can manage. So we know that electric fences can work to keep elephants out, but typically they're too expensive. They take far too long to build. No one can maintain them. The cost is exponential. So they're innovative. They're being innovative with this unique sort of single strand type of electric fence that the farmers can move from tree to tree. So they can basically change the design of electric fence as their farming plots shift throughout the year. And if an elephant was to break through, they have a system where they can adapt by adding extra lines, dangles. It's kind of like do-it-yourself kit electric fence, and it's very cheap. And every farmer can be in charge of their own system. And I'm a real believer of empowering individual farmers to manage their own process. And they've sent us, next slide, please. They've sent us some fantastic camera trap photos showing forest elephants coming into the farms and being stopped by this single strand electric fence. And here's, it's really unusual to even get forest elephants on camera traps. So to see them testing the methods that we've funded is really, really cool. And this was just taken a few months ago. Next slide, please. And, by understanding these photos and seeing that elephant coming up and then in this photo turning away, it gives us a huge amount of hope that these innovative low-cost methods are working in forest environments as well as in the savannah. And we mustn't forget that these farmers are really at the extreme end of the poverty chain. If you're earning $1 a day, you're doing pretty well in some of these communities. So it's vital that we're thinking of methods that are cheap enough and also livelihood projects as well. Next slide, please. Now, this photo is taken from one of our partners who are really focusing on the livelihood side of living with elephants. And this is a photo taken by Wild Survivors, which is a partner of ours in Tanzania, who've taken our idea of beehive fences. They came for training with us. They went back to Tanzania and they've built over 4 kilometers of beehive fences, keeping elephants in the park towards the Ngorongoro crater and protecting the farms on the right-hand side. And one of the reasons we really encourage beehive fences and we really are supportive of this idea is this triple benefit that deterrence like this can have for the poorest of the poor communities. So Wild Survivors are helping this community with beekeeping skills. They're understanding that the bees are pollinating the crops and they can sell the honey and make some additional income. Next slide, please. And one of the most exciting things about this for me is it's not just an elephant deterrent. This is a really perfect project to help women in the community get excited about beekeeping and to learn all the methods for working with wild bees. So here at the ECF, we've helped fund a new apiary for them. Next slide, please. Oh, yes. So here's the team with Wild Survivors, and you see all of those individuals. Hard to tell, but they're all women. And one of our trainers is there on the left, second left in the white, Lois, who we brought from Kenya to come and meet these wonderful ladies. And it was just so great to have a cross-team education experience where we were able to bring our ideas, we were able to learn from their group. They've been funded with that beautiful apiary by the Elephant Crisis Fund grant that they received. And just this week, we've sent off another grant for them for the next year, because we really believe in supporting projects that have a sustainable aim. Because we can't continually fund projects for their whole life. We want these projects to have their own source of income and funding. And we really think that beekeeping is one of the essential life sports. So next slide, please. One of the things, of course, we're really passionate about is connectivity and protecting national parks. Without the protection of the wild spaces that elephants have always lived in, we are going to be in huge trouble. And a lot of our parks are paper parks in Africa, which means basically you can see them on a map, but when you get there, there's not much infrastructure, there's hardly any animals, and there's no support for the rangers. Now, Tanzania actually has a really extensive national park network. They're one of the better countries in Africa in terms of how much ambition they have for protecting large areas. And yet, even in this really progressive thinking country with lots of ideas for national park protection, there are whole sections of the country that are becoming disconnected. And here is an example of a grant that we have supported with our partners Southern Tanzania Elephant Project between the Udzungwa Mountains on the left-hand side and the Selous ecosystem and Nyeri National Park to the right. So these two parks have now been divided by a huge swathe of farmland. And we've supported a grant to help, we've supported with a grant to help connect these two ecosystems together with a 150-meter long wide corridor, 12 kilometers long, 150 meters wide. And it doesn't sound like much. Next slide, please. But this is kind of the last step that we do, is like buy back strips of farmland. And this strip is feeding its way all the way down to this bridge. And this is the one bridge and the one road that was blocking the whole connectivity. So the partners built this underpass so the elephants can squeeze under the road and pop back into the ecosystem. Next slide, please. So they've managed to gather a number of supporters together. The grant that we gave them helped with 260 farmers being compensated for just small bits of farmland. And it's just a few meters here and there. Not one farmer lost his whole plot. It really was a question of hiving off bits and pieces. And here's the team putting up the fence, literally getting ready to secure this corridor forever. And we get very excited about that because it's securing the future and reducing conflict for the future. Next slide, please. Some of the conflict that we're seeing is really quite serious. This is a photograph from our partners in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a very special country. It has, I think, the second largest population of elephants in Africa. The figures are slightly unsure about. Some estimates are as high as 100,000. We're not totally sure of the absolute figure, but it's very high, and there's a very high human population. So Zimbabwe is struggling at the moment with a high level of human-elephant conflict and really not sure what to do with this crisis that they're under. So we are looking to Zimbabwe to try and support as much as we can in some of these difficult places. And one of the areas is Victoria Falls, which I'm sure some of you have been to. It's a high impact tourist zone where the elephants are highly regarded for tourism, but they are free roaming and they're literally wandering in and out of the towns, in and out of the tourist sites, in and out of hotels, lodges. And they are huge, these bull elephants. You can see by the car next to it. This is just walking next to the main town. Next photo, please. This is a video that was taken by our partners just to illustrate some of the challenges. You're wondering what the music is. This is a bull elephant eating from a trash can that is literally right next to a bar in Zimbabwe. And the people in the bar are literally oblivious to the fact that he's there. He's got tissue paper on his tusk. And there is the bar. So, yeah, it doesn't take much of an imagination to think about what might happen if those members from the bar walk out. And we just pause, thank you. If they walk out and walk with a few beers inside them straight into that elephant. So it's really like these types of conflicts and overlapping issues are becoming more and more serious. And you know, how we talk about this is it is a genuine crisis. We have 7-ton pachyderms walking through people's houses, walking into bars, walking across roads. And we know that part of the reason is the fact that their national parks are being sort of invaded by cattle. They're not being looked after. There is such a fundamental lack of funding at the moment towards these national parks and protected areas. And the network of partners that we have developed through the anti-poaching grants, through the anti-trafficking grants, through the Elephant Crisis Fund have been fundamental in this next step where we want to come in and help protect the landscape that these elephants in. And if we can protect the landscape and the corridors, and we can work with the communities with these novel ideas of how to live with elephants and how to live with eco-friendly, elephant-friendly activities, we have a hope for the future, but it's incredibly costly. And so as you can see, the Elephant Crisis Fund has been raising between $3 and $5 million a year. We could spend 3 times that if we had it. The need is so great. And this year has been one of our worst funding years, to be honest. The funding has dropped significantly. We know this is because of the global crisis. We've lost a few big donors, but we're so happy to have just received a large donation of $100,000 that will be offered if we can match it. So someone has said, if you can raise $50,000 before the end of Christmas, we'll match it with 50 and we'll go up to $100,000. So this is a massive story for us. We've just heard this a couple of days ago. And so if there's anyone out there who would like to match that donation, even if it's bits and pieces, we would be so thrilled because we want to kick off 2023 with some really larger projects. We want to be protecting corridors, protecting land, working with these really innovative community groups and not stopping on the research as well. All these innovative mitigation methods, they really work, but it takes time, it takes training, and it takes bringing women and children and everyone on board to help us with this massive mission. And you guys at the Elephant Crisis Fund, you as our donors, are critical to this story, as well as WCN, the Wildlife Conservation Network, has been so fundamental to help us. We're so grateful for the teamwork, for the collaboration, for Charlie and Gigi who help us with the board allocations. So thank you so much, WCN. I know you're on this call, and I know we work with you every day, but sometimes we don't say thank you enough. Thank you to everyone. And we really hope that as we go into next year, we can do even more with your funding. So thanks so much. We're really open to questions. And of course, we're always open for you to come and visit us out here in Kenya. It's such a beautiful place and the rains have finally arrived. So I have bugs flying around me at the moment. The rains are out in full force. So it's a really exciting time for us. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jofi, Chris, and Lucy. I think you've done real justice to the depth of knowledge that you and the rest of the Save the Elephant team has, and the service that you provide for all of us to make sure that we can invest in the best elephant projects with confidence. And of course, for service that you provide for all those grantees and the elephants and communities. We'll touch back on that. I have a privilege and honor of working with you on a regular basis, but I want to make sure that we get some questions from the audience that you can answer so that they can have that same benefit of all your knowledge and expertise. I'll probably start with the same order as some of the presentation, and I think there's been a message that's gone out, so folks can see that they could put their questions in the chat. They could also put them in the Q&A. We've got team members that will make sure that we get all the questions. Then I'm going to get an onslaught of questions, and we only have about 13 minutes. Let's start off with the ivory trade, which is where Chris has started, and we'll work our way down some of these other issues. It's great to see that the ivory trade has been on a back foot. It is no longer the main threat in most countries. Chris, I was wondering if you could give us a bit of an update, as people might have read recently that the CITES conference took place. Maybe briefly describe CITES, and if there was any major decisions there that would affect elephants, whether you fear a resurgence of trade. There's a specific question that had come in from Helen about whether or about why China had clamped down on the ivory trade, and if the change in relationships with the West might change that trajectory that they were on. So if you could touch on some of the policy issues of the ivory trade and what impact you fear it could have, or you don't fear it could have, on elephant populations in the field, would be great.
Okay, thanks very much. CITES was like Groundhog Day. It was all the same. It was all the same proposals. It was all the same results. The Southern Africans wanted to trade in ivory. The East and West Africans wanted to stop them. Well, they're not trading in ivory. They wanted to move the elephant populations up to a higher level. Both proposals were knocked down. That's fine. You know, the fact that Southern Africa has this Appendix 2 status, where in theory they might be allowed to trade, doesn't matter too much as long as they haven't got anywhere to sell it to, and as long as they don't have the mechanisms to allow them to sell ivory. So it was an okay conclusion. You know, the situation remains the same. Ivory trade does not take place. There was a lot of issues around the live trade in elephants, which is more a welfare issue than a conservation issue, because the numbers are relatively small, and there has been a lot of concern about Namibia selling elephants into zoos in the Middle East. That seems to have been put on ice for the moment, at any rate. So that was probably the main output, but everything else stayed much the same. The question about ivory and the Chinese, I think they were being embarrassed by being the major destination for ivory. It wasn't a big issue for them to ban it, and that is why ivory, I think, is somewhat different from pangolin scales and rhino horn. In both of those are part of the pharmacopoeia of Chinese traditional medicine, which President Xi supports. I think it's much more difficult for them to clamp down on those two. And so, you know, there was some traditional interest in carving ivory. There was some question about whether that was going to be maintained, but that's not what really sustained the ivory trade that was killing elephants. That was all the sort of low-level bangles, chopsticks, and so on. And I think, you know, China, one thing you can say about China is their law enforcement is effective. They are committed to closing down the ivory trade. There is a small amount going on with, we think, stuff being sent by post and by courier services. At the moment, it doesn't seem to be enough to have a big impact and to push for a resurgence in elephant poaching. But we continue to support anti-trafficking efforts. We continue to keep an eye on what is going on, because it could come back again. And I think part of the question was also about Vietnam. Vietnam was primarily a staging post on the way to China, which was where the destination and the consumption was. We have got a grant with an organization, the ENV, in China, in Vietnam, because there was a concern that there was a possible emergence of a domestic ivory market consumption in Vietnam, rather than ivory going to Vietnam and then being moved on into China. It doesn't seem to be too big at the moment. It's not enough to be really concerned about.
So, Chris,
yeah.
I'm going to jump in there. Thank you. I just want to be mindful of time.
Yes,
I'm going
sorry.
to ask this one quick question also, in case you have a short answer for it, and if not, maybe we can research it and send it later. But Idris was asking if we knew the monetary value of a living elephant as compared to estimates of $40,000 on the illegal market for a dead elephant. Do we have a sense of how much a living elephant is worth to national economies?
Different elephants are worth different amounts. So an elephant in Amboseli, which is where the numbers for live elephants mostly came from, is worth a great deal in terms of tourism. I could give you a 2-hour answer on this, and both of us would be equally confused at the end of it. There is no single answer. So if every elephant has a different value, if you want to try and put a financial value on it, and every elephant we can argue about for hours about what that value might be.
Okay.
Not sure that's not why we conserve elephants.
Thank you for that. And I think the key part here is all these questions are complex. The team at the Elephant Crisis Fund is always open also to engaging on these things. So you don't have to just ask your questions during these webinars. Feel free to reach out to us at other points of the year and engage with the team. They're really full of knowledge. I'm going to switch a little bit to some of the other parts of a presentation. Maybe start with questions related to some of the toolkit that Lucy presented. And Farkid notices and points out something we all know, that elephants are very smart animals. And so the question is, are they going to find out one day that some of those beehive fences are dummies? Are they going to eventually start to break through these beehive fences? How do you think they're going to adapt to the different tools that are being put out in the toolkit?
Yeah, thanks everyone. We are, the great thing about our toolkit is we're all elephant behavior scientists who are working on it. And we really do start from the elephant's point of view by understanding how elephants behave, how they smell, how they hear, how they see, how they physically respond. We're able to look at these things and go, okay, this is why chilies are working, but they will only work in this situation. This is when beehive fences are going to become less effective. Which is really fun, and that's why we've got such a young team of interested interns and scientists here, like working on all sorts of mitigation tools. So here in Sigala, where we have 51 beehive fence farms being trialed across the front line of 650 beehives, we have in those beehive fence farms all sorts of other mitigation tools. So we mix and match quite a lot. So that we've had a terrible 2-year drought here in Kenya. I'm sure you've heard about it. We've lost a lot of our bee colonies. But some of our farmers have 2 or 3 other mitigation methods that they have to back themselves up if those beehives go empty because of a drought. So we've got watchtowers, we've got the smelly elephant repellent, which you can make any time of the year. We have lights, we have ditches, and we're encouraging people to grow drought-friendly crops like sunflowers. So this is the whole point of the toolbox, is there's no one perfect method. Have a look through it, read all the different things, work out which ones work in your environment. The forest is going to be quite different to the dry areas of Mali, for example. And so we're quite enjoying this. And this is why the ECF has been such a joy for me, because I'm meeting so many partners in unusual elephant zones where we can have a really interactive scientific conversation and we're helping each other. So I'm having these long emails, Zooms with partners in Equatorial Guinea and Liberia, trying to work out together with my experience and with their knowledge of the field, what's the most appropriate method. So we're not just sub-granting to people, that's not it at all. We are investing in people in the field who are actively trying and thinking differently about this situation. So it's kind of exciting, and we really feel like we're on a journey together. And so this is why it's quite fun to update you. We have a lot of partners who join us on all of these calls, and I think you're seeing the progress of all these new mitigation methods coming in. So yeah, we're looking forward to updating you next year as the next grants go out and we see how these ideas have been working as the data is coming in.
Great, thank you, Lucy. I think there's been a number of questions as well about people wanting to volunteer skills, especially veterinarians. I think an answer has been provided on the chat that the best way forward for that is really to reach out directly to those projects, the Save the Elephants team included, but also if you know of elephant project in the particular countries where you are or have an ability to volunteer, reach out to those and describe your skills. And if you don't know how to reach out to those people, feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to put you in touch. But there are many different kinds of ways that you can help. I also do want to maybe pick up on a question that Helen posted with regards to the human population that is growing and the pressure that puts on wildlife, and how you and other teams of conservationists address questions around family planning and reproductive services in the different local and cultural context. I think that probably is best answered by Lucy, given your work on human-elephant coexistence.
Yeah, I mean, hi, Helen, it's nice to hear from you again. We've had some good chats already with Helen. I'm on your page with this. We're really encouraging of this, we're looking to the future really. And so many of our communities are really crying out for more support in this field. What people need is choice in life. It's not being dictated to, it's not having no choice and ending up in a really dire situation. And we really believe in having choice in your family and giving those community members living on the front line with wildlife that choice. There are multiple examples of projects which are very successfully tying really good conservation messaging and success with enabling communities to manage their own family size. And of course, that comes with better education. It means that you have fewer children to educate, and you can make sure they go all the way through their education system. So you'll be pleased to know that more of our ECF partners are looking at community support, particularly health projects. We're partnering with several health programs right now that we're working out good methods. And again, every single site is different, so there's no blanket solution to this. But what we're finding is just massive, consistent investment from governments in this field. And so we're really thrilled actually to hear that the USA has just announced a very large funding grant to Africa. 50 of our African leaders were at the White House yesterday, from what we heard, and there's been a significant investment from overseas to help boost some of these things. I was at our clinic here this morning, and there's literally not a single kind of glove there. We had to rush into town and go and buy a whole load of supplies to get them through the Christmas season. They've run out of condoms. There's nothing here. So it's the supply chains, which are some of the problems. And COVID has not helped at all. Our fuel out in Kenya has gone up by 40% since Ukraine has been invaded. So these things are having giant knock-on effects. Who would have thought that Russia invading Ukraine would stop condoms in my village? But it turns out that these are the kind of knock-on effects that we're seeing because of the rapid rise in price of transport. So yeah, much more needs to be done in this field, and I think everyone's up for it, including the religious leaders who we talk to here. We're not being exclusive, we're engaging with everyone, and more of our partners are doing the same, and we're having those conversations through our granting process, which is really exciting.
Thank you,
and likewise, we're learning how things are in different countries.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm sorry for cutting you off, and we're going to go over by just a few minutes, but we're going to wrap this up just a few minutes after the hour. I'm going to get to one last question and then let people go. The question comes from Balin Singh, asking if there are any mechanisms underway to finance natural capital elephant conservation by governments, such as it's been done for rhinos with a rhino bond. I don't know if Chris, you want to take a stab at this, kind of being plugged into various funding mechanisms, or if Lucy, you've got insight, and I'll ask you to keep that answer pretty short, please.
Yeah, so no, important question, and I think there's a lot of people concerned about this. So the rhino bond, there were going to be two issuings of the rhino bond. One was going to be in South Africa, one was going to be in Kenya. They both, so the South African one has finally gone through, the Kenyan one has not. And it's incredibly complicated, and the appetite maybe is not as good as we had hoped. I think one of the biggest concerns we have is that people are trying to shoehorn biodiversity conservation into carbon finance. And we need to be able to say the world should be financing conservation and biodiversity without necessarily having to hook it on to carbon. So there's a lot of people now thinking about this problem and trying to come up with new approaches. So not there yet, but very much in the front of people's minds.
Great, thank you. That's a very good summary of a very complicated questions, and there are obviously discussions ongoing now at the Convention on Biodiversity in Montreal happening. So we'll keep a close eye on all the space. I want to close this out by thanking all of you, the team at Save the Elephants, all of you in attendance who have supported us and trusted our work. I think you can see the depth of knowledge that the Elephant Crisis Fund team has in terms of going out to different sites, the technical knowledge that they bring to assess the quality of projects. They do a phenomenal amount of work scouring Africa and the rest of the world for the best projects. So if you really care about the future of elephants, I think investing in the Elephant Crisis Fund is a great mechanism. We're highly efficient. The team on the front line takes the risk out by vetting all these great projects and monitoring them. Elephants have been out of the news. Lucy mentioned that we've had probably our poorest fundraising year this year. One of those big donors that left was a corporate partner, and I think it's part of a cycle that we go through. But we also know that elephants have been less talked about. I think the good news that has happened around the decline of ivory-driven poaching might also make people feel that elephants are out of the wood. The reality is that they're not, and the bigger threat is still out there of how do we coexist? How do we ensure that people and elephant can coexist? How do we secure landscapes for these ghost elephants to be able to retreat back to? They are extraordinarily resilient, and we need to continue to invest. I think one great thing you all can do is get involved, spread the word, tell your friends, share some news from the Elephant Crisis Fund. No donations too big, no donations too small. We've got a match, but this is not the only time of year that you can support. And in advance of all of that, I really want to thank you for the trust and generosity that you've already expressed towards us and what you'll be able to continue to do in the future, because elephants and people really deserve it. On that note, I want to end with deep gratitude. I want to wish you all very, very happy holiday season. Stay safe and reach out to us if there's anything we can do to help you connect to elephant conservationists through the ECF or through some of its grantees. Thank you and take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.